One of the scariest things that can happen to us in our lives is suddenly being taken somewhere and completely disappearing off the face of the earth. In the eyes of everyone, we simply just vanished and no one knows where we went. Police do their best to try to find us, most of the time, but sometimes cases are just left unsolved. And for this year, for our Halloween special, we're going to be taking a look at the Unsolved Mysteries/Murders Iceberg and explain through the levels on what they mean and how they are part of the Unsolved Iceberg. Welcome everyone, my name is Juby Scott and welcome to our Halloween special Unsolved Mysteries Iceberg Explained. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer that was active in London during 1888. Many crimes were committed against women, including murder and almost disembowelment from this killer. The reason that it's on this iceberg is that the identity of Jack the Ripper was never founded. There are even some cases where people believe it was a woman, since a lot of the women that were killed were prostitutes at the time. One of the most interesting sources we've gotten so far, I don't know if it's confirmed yet, is that it is to believe that Jack the Ripper was a cop, which is how he knew the police routes and how he was able to avoid the police during that time. One of the interesting things that Jack the Ripper would do was that Jack would actually send letters to the police in the police district, basically taunting them, and he would sign it himself as Jack the Ripper. Unfortunately at this time, and probably we will never know, the identity of Jack the Ripper has never been founded. The Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer is an unidentified serial killer who operated in Northern Carolina in the late 1960s. The case has been described as the most famous unsolved murder case in American history, becoming a fixture of popular culture and inspiring amateur detectives to attempt to resolve it. The Zodiac has confirmed 5 known murders in the San Francisco Bay Area between December 1968 and October 1969. Very similar to Jack the Ripper, the Zodiac Killer would also send letters to the police, basically taunting them. One interesting thing about the Zodiac Killer is that the police were looking for the killer and they actually walked by him. One of the officers did actually believe that it was a Zodiac Killer that they just walked by, judging from the composite sketch. Unfortunately, they put out an APB looking for a black fellow. The Zodiac Killer was aware of this and sent a letter in the following day, basically telling them that they walked right by him and didn't even know. The Zodiac Killer stopped writing to the police in 1974, and the identity of the killer hasn't been found since. The Murder of the Grimes Sisters. The Murder of the Grimes Sisters is an unsolved double murder that occurred in Chicago, Illinois on December 28, 1956, in which 2 sisters named Barbara and Patricia Grimes, aged 15 and 12, disappeared while traveling from Brighton Park Movie Theater to their home in McKinley Park. Their disappearance is one of the largest missing persons investigations in the history of Chicago. The girls' nude bodies were discovered alongside a deserted road in Willow Springs on January 22, 1957. Although the girls' autopsies report came back as they were murdered within 5 hours of their last confirmed sighting, no killer was ever charged and no one has ever been found for this murder. This case is also acknowledged as one of the most labor-intensive missing person and murder investigations in Cook County, and remains one of Chicago's most infamous cold cases. O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson's on this iceberg because of his wife Goldman and Brown. Because the way the trial went during the time, there was a lot of back and forth and a lot of racial gap. While everyone in the U.S. observed the same evidence as the jury, there were a lot of people that believed that this was a racial move. They were just trying to pin it on O.J. Simpson just because he was black. Because of this, it became a very strange mystery with how O.J. Simpson was reacting and all sorts of things. However, most recent polling shows the gap has narrowed since the trial, with over half of polled black respondents in 2013 stating they believed that Simpson was guilty. Unfortunately, at the time being, O.J. Simpson was found not guilty. And for all we know, we just let a man get away with a double murder. Bob Crane. Robert Edward Crane was an American actor, drummer, radio personality, and disc jockey known for starring in the CBS situation comedy Hogan's Heroes. Crane's career declined after Hogan's Heroes. He became frustrated with the few roles that he was being offered and began performing in dinner theater. On one night in June 1978, Crane was found bludgeoned to death in his Scottsdale, Arizona apartment while on tour. The homicide remains officially unsolved. His previously uncontroversial public image suffered due to the suspicious nature of his death. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. The Tunguska Event. The Tunguska Event was a 12-megaton explosion that occurred near Russia on the morning of June 30th, 1908. The explosion over the sparsely populated eastern Siberian taiga flattened an estimated 80 million trees over an area of 830 square miles of forest. An eyewitness report suggests that at least 3 people may have died in this event. The explosion is generally attributed to a meteor airburst, but unfortunately there was no crater from the asteroid to be found. Because of this, no one knows if Russia fired a missile onto the town or if a meteor actually did hit the area. Tupac. Tupac Shakur was an American rapper who was shot on September 7th, 1996 in a drive-by shooting in Las Vegas, Nevada. He was 25 years old. The shooting occurred at 11:15 p.m. Tupac was struck by 4 .40 caliber rounds fired from a Glock, 2 in the chest, 1 in the arm, and 1 in the thigh. He died from his wounds 6 days later. While no one was ever charged for the murder of Tupac, there was a lot of people that believe that the murder of the notorious B.I.G. 6 months later was connected. Glitches in reality. Glitches in reality is stuff that occurs that cannot easily be explained. Best way to show examples of this is I will read you 2 stories about people who have encountered glitches in reality. I once found a ring in a cemetery. It had clearly been dropped and was not on any grave, so I took it and my mom posted about it on Facebook. Nobody ever claimed it, so I kept it. It wasn't fancy, just a dark metal with a small eye-like pattern. It was always cold to the touch and had no gems. One day, I lost it at school. I was super sad about it because I had gotten attached to it and worn it every day. So I told my mom that I lost it, and she promised to look for it as she worked at the school as a cleaner. We had not been outside that day, so it had to be inside. I got home that day, and guess what was on my bed? The damn ring. Of course I was happy, but in the back of my mind I was confused, because I knew I put it on. My mom came home 2 hours later, and guess what she found? My ring. I now had 2 identical rings. She found it in my classroom near my desk. I still have both rings, but refuse to wear them. When I was 5, I was playing in my room while my mom was cooking dinner downstairs. My toys were always on a really high shelf that I couldn't reach alone, so I needed my mom to get them for me. I shouted down to her to get me one of my toys, but she said that I had to wait a little until she could come upstairs. I waited like 5 minutes before I decided to try to get them myself. I was jumping and trying to grab it, but I still couldn't reach. That was until I started floating. This sounds so stupid to write down, but I remember it. I reached the toy and started playing with it. After a few more minutes, my mom came up and saw I had the toy. She asked me how I managed to get it, and I told her I floated. She didn't believe me, but none of us would have any explanation of how else I could have gotten it. So as you can see, it's phenomenons that either replicate itself, or you're suddenly lag switching and going somewhere that you couldn't actually access. The Red Room. The Red Room is a website on the deep web that apparently people can go and place bets or gamble on how to kill a certain individual in a room. These can range from some of the most heartbreaking events you can think of, or anything of that sort. These people would pay in Bitcoin and would essentially pay to watch someone get tortured. To this day, there hasn't been a recorded incident of the Red Room being a real thing. A lot of people believe that it's not real, but we can only explore the deep web so long, and clearly this had to have come from somewhere. So is it real? The Notorious B.I.G. Christopher Wallace, an American rapper known professionally as the Notorious B.I.G., was murdered in a drive-by shooting in the early hours of March 9, 1997, in LA, California. He was 24 years old. Retired LAPD officer Greg Cadling alleged that Marion Surge Knight, the head of Death Row Records, orchestrated the murder in revenge for the September 1996 murder of Tupac in a similar drive-by homicide by gunshot. Media reports had previously speculated that Wallace was in some way connected to Tupac's murder, though no evidence ever surfaced to seriously implicate him. Shortly after Wallace's death, Los Angeles Times writer Chuck Phillips and Matt Light reported that the key suspect in this murder was a member of the Southside Crips acting out of a personal financial motive, rather than on the gang's behalf. The investigation stalled, however, and no one was ever formally charged. Elisa Lam. On February 19, 2013, the body of a Chinese-Canadian tourist, Elisa Lam, was recovered from a large system atop the Stay on Main Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, where she had been a guest. She was last seen alive on January 31st and was reported missing by her parents on February 1st. Before the disappearance, there was a hotel's elevator security footage that showed Elisa Lam entering an elevator but looking very concerned, as if she was being followed. Once she exited the elevator, this was the last known footage of Elisa Lam alive. After that, guests on the Stay on Main Hotel started complaining about the color and smell of their tap water. Once someone went out to investigate the large cistern atop of the Stay on Main Hotel, Elisa Lam's body was discovered to be inside, drowning and naked. The reason this would be on the Iceberg is that no one knows what happened to Elisa Lam to get her in there. The cistern cover was extremely hard to open for someone like her, and unfortunately there is no suspects on who could have murdered Elisa Lam. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. The Pass Incident was an event in which 9 Soviet trekkers died in the northern Ural Mountains between February 1st and February 2nd, 1959, in certain circumstances. The experienced trekking group had established camp on the eastern slopes in the Russian SFSR of the Soviet Union. Overnight, something caused them to cut their way out of their tents and flee the campsite while inadequately dressed for the heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. After the group's bodies were discovered, an investigation by Soviet authorities determined that 6 of them had died from hypothermia, while the other 3 had been killed by physical trauma. 1 victim had major skull damage, 2 had severe chest trauma, and another had a small crack in his skull. 4 of the bodies were found lying in running water in a creek, and 3 of these 4 had damaged soft tissue of the head and face. 2 of the bodies had missing eyes, 1 had a missing tongue, and 1 had missing eyebrows. The investigation concluded that a compelling natural force had caused the deaths. Numerous theories have been put forward to account for the unexplained deaths, including animal attacks, hypothermia, an avalanche, winds, infrasound-induced panic, military involvement, or some combination of these factors. Russia opened a new investigation into the incident in 2019, and its conclusions were presented in July 2020 that an avalanche had led to their deaths. Survivors had been forced to suddenly leave their camp in low visibility conditions with inadequate clothing, and had died of hypothermia. Now this is what Russia's saying. There's a bunch of theories that something scared these trekkers to make them cut out of their tents and start running away. Another big theory is that the abominable snowman had actually attacked them. Another theory is that a large creature had attacked their campsite, hence why they left in inadequate clothing and basically had physical trauma to their body. One of the biggest theories on that is this was an attack by the abominable snowman. The Black Dahlia murder case. On the morning of January 15th, 1947, a mother taking her child for a walk in the Los Angeles neighborhood stumbled upon a gruesome sight. The body of a young naked woman sliced clean in half at the waist. The body was just a few feet from the sidewalk and posed in such a way that the mother reportedly thought it was a mannequin at first sight. Despite the extensive mutilation and cuts on the body, there wasn't a drop of blood at the scene, indicating that the young woman had been killed elsewhere. The ensuing investigation was led by the LA Police Department. The FBI was asked to help, and it quickly identified the body, just 56 minutes in fact, after getting blurred fingerprints via sound photo from Los Angeles. The young woman turned out to be the 22-year-old Hollywood hopeful named Elizabeth Short, later dubbed the Black Dahlia by the press for her rumored penchant for sheer black clothes and for the Blue Dahlia movie out at the time. Based on the early suspicions that the murderer may have had skills in dissection because the body was so cleanly cut, agents were also asked to check out a group of students at the University of Southern California Medical School. And, in a tantalizing potential break in the case, the Bureau searched for a match to fingerprints found on the anonymous letter that may have been sent to authorities by the killer, but the prints weren't in FBI files. Who killed the Black Dahlia, and why, is a mystery. The murderer has never been found, and given how much time has passed, probably never will be. Section 2. Art Heist at the Gardner Museum. The 1990 theft of 13 works of art from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum's collection remains unsolved. Although the museum's commitment to resolving the crime has never diminished since its occurrence 31 years ago, the museum, the FBI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office are still seeking viable leads that could result in the safe return of the art. In the early morning hours of March 18, 1990, 13 works of art were stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. Guards admitted 2 men posing as police officers responding to a disturbance call, and the thieves tied the guards up and looted the museum over the next hour. The case is unsolved, no arrests have been made, and no works have been recovered. The stolen works have been valued at hundreds of millions of dollars by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and art dealers. The FBI believes that the robbery was planned by a criminal organization. The case lacks strong physical evidence, and the FBI has largely depended on interrogations, undercover informants, and sting operations to collect information. Unfortunately, no artwork has been found. This next case is very special to me because this case is actually what got me into looking up unsolved mysteries throughout the years. The murder of JonBenet Ramsey. JonBenet Patricia Ramsey was born August 6, 1990 in Atlanta, Georgia, U.S. On December 26, 1996 in the morning, JonBenet's parents went to go wake her up and found that she wasn't in her bed. They started searching throughout the house and found that JonBenet Ramsey was found in the closet in the basement, found dead. She had sustained a broken skull from a blow to the head and had been strangled. A garrote was found tied around her neck. An investigation was launched for the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. Footprints were found outside leading to the house, but no footprints were found leaving the house. Because of this, it was suspected that JonBenet's older brother, mother, and father were the possible murderers. Unfortunately, not enough evidence was founded by these three, and the case remains unsolved to this day. Who is D.B. Cooper? D.B. Cooper was an unidentified man who hijacked a Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a Boeing 727 aircraft operated by Northwest Orient Airlines. D.B. Cooper told the flight attendant that he was armed with a bomb, demanded $200,000 in ransom, and requested 4 parachutes upon landing in Seattle. After releasing the passengers in Seattle, the hijacker instructed the flight crew to refuel the aircraft and to begin a second flight to Mexico City, with a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. Approximately 30 minutes after taking off from Seattle, the hijacker opened the aircraft's aft door, deployed the staircase, and parachuted into the night over southwestern Washington. The hijacker was never identified, apprehended, or found. The hijacker identified himself as Dan Cooper, but because of a reporter's mistake, became known as D.B. Cooper. The money and the man haven't been found to this day. The Icebox Murders. On the evening of June 23, 1965, Houston Police Captain Charles Bullock and his partner L.M. Barta were dispatched to the home of Fred and Edwin Rogers for a welfare check. Edwina's nephew, Marvin Martin, hadn't heard from his aunt for a worrying amount of time. Their knock was met with silence, so the two police officers went around the back of the house. They found a makeshift barricade of flower pots obstructing the back door, which made Bullock suspicious. When he and Barta pushed inside and entered the kitchen, his suspicions shifted into adrenaline. He later remembered that something just didn't feel right inside the Rogers home. "I don't know why I looked in the refrigerator," he said. "For some reason, I just opened it." At first, Bullock and Barta thought they were seeing was hog meat. Then they looked down. There, in the vegetable drawer, were two decapitated human heads. Edwina had been shot in the head, Fred had been bludgeoned with a hammer, but the killer has gone above and beyond simply killing the Rogers. He also dismembered the couple, removed Fred's genitals, and flushed Fred's intestines down the toilet. Quickly, the investigation into the Icebox murders pivoted to a single suspect, the couple's 42-year-old son Charles. Charles Roger lived with his parents, there was blood on the keyhole of his door, and he was nowhere to be found. A nationwide search to find him, however, yielded nothing. Authorities even checked the local airfields as Rogers learned how to fly while serving in the Navy. He was officially declared dead in 1975. But the mystery didn't die with him. Indeed, some suspect that Charles Rogers did much more than kill his parents, and that he might have been involved in the plot to kill John F. Kennedy. The reason for killing his parents is unknown, but it is suspected to be that Charles Rogers' parents uncovered his diaries, which went in detail on the assassination of John F. Kennedy. When he found out his parents had discovered this, he went ahead and killed them. In the end, if Rogers did manage to kill his parents and disappear, his theoretical work for the CIA isn't as outlandish as it seems. After all, he left not a single trace, completed the mission, and vanished like a ghost. The Smiling Stones. I tried looking this up and I hope this is the correct thing, but if it's not, I do apologize. The Smiling Stones are a series of strange card stones found in central Massachusetts that are baffling researchers. So far, 4 to 5 of these granite stones have been found. The stones have been described as being made of granite and ranging from 6 to 25 pounds. They all possess odd smiley faces with deep sunken eyes and wide grinning mouths. These faces do not appear to have been carved by hand, but rather chipped away by other stones. One of the theories is that this was simply Native American art. Unfortunately, local Native American tribes have stated that the stones are not their doing. So what caused these? Ashy Degree Disappearance. Aisha Degree Disappearance. Aisha was born on August 5, 1990, went missing at the age of 9 from Shelby, North Carolina, United States. In the early morning hours of February 14, 2000, for reasons unknown, she packed her book bag and left her family home north of the city and began walking along nearby North Carolina highway, despite heavy rain and wind. Several passing motorists reported seeing her. One passerby began to approach her. She left the roadside and ran into a wooded area. In the morning, her parents discovered her missing from her bedroom. No one has seen her since. An intensive search began the day led to the location of some of her personal effects near where she was last just seen. A year and a half later, her book bag, still packed, was unearthed from a construction site along the Highway 18, north of Shelby and Morganton. At the point where she ran into the woods, a billboard now stands, appealing for help finding her. Her family hosts an annual walk from their home to the billboard to draw attention to the case. While the circumstances of Degree's disappearance at first seemed to suggest she was just simply running away from home, investigators could not find a clear reason she might have done so. She was younger than most children who do. They had speculated that she might have been abducted instead. The case has drawn national media attention. In 2015, the FBI joined state and county authorities in a reopened investigation, offering a reward for information that could help solve the case. Unfortunately, the status of Degree is she's been missing for 22 years, 7 months, and 27 days. The Smiley Face Murders. From the late 1920s to the 2010s, several young men were found dead in bodies of water across the Midwestern American states. At first, this was believed to be a bunch of drownings, but it was concluded by law enforcement agencies that they were victims of serial killer or killers. The term smiley face became connected to the alleged murders when it was made public that the police had discovered graffiti depicting a smiley face near locations where they think the killer dumped the bodies, in at least a dozen of the cases. Jamison family deaths. On October 8, 2009, the Jamison family in Oklahoma, United States, Bobby, Sherilyn, and their daughter Madison Jamison, mysteriously disappeared. 4 years after the family was missing, two hunters in a remote spot of Latimer County in November 2013 found the family's pickup truck that had been abandoned. 3 miles away from the pickup truck, the skeletal remains of 2 adults and a child were discovered. No one understands what happened to the Jamison family, but the theories have gone from owing money to a crime family or being heavily into drugs and going to a deal. The creepiness about this is that if it was a drug deal, why would the parents bring Madison along with them? Elaine Nix. Jacqueline Elaine Nix was 18 years old when her body was found on September 29, 1999, the victim of an unsolved homicide. On September 20th, 1999, Elaine Nix pulled over to use the payphone at Zach's Food Rack convenience store on Chandler Road in Hall County. She called her boyfriend. Right after that call, Elaine vanished, but her car was left behind in the parking lot. Her key was in the ignition, her purse was in the back seat. 9 days later, on September 29th, Elaine's body was found about 17 miles away in some woods, just over the county line, in the Beaufort area of Gwinnett County. Her clothes were missing, but her jewelry was on her body. The investigation was at a dead end. The Hinterkaifeck Massacre. On March 31, 1922, 6 inhabitants of a small Bavarian farmstead, located north of Germany, were murdered by an unknown assailant. The 6 victims were Andreas Gruber, Kazilla Gruber, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabrielle, Victoria's children Kazilla and Joseph, and the maid Maria Baumgartner. They were all found struck dead. The perpetrator or perpetrators lived with the 6 corpses of their victims for 3 days. The murders are considered to be one of the most gruesome and puzzling unsolved crimes in German history. 4 of the dead bodies were stacked up in the barn. The victims had been lured there one by one. Prior to the incident, the family had their previous maid reported hearing strange sounds coming from the attic, which led that maid to quit. The case remains unsolved to this day. Ida Lowry. On April 23, 1960, at about 12:30 a.m., Edwin Smith was driving home, heading north along North Plankinton Avenue. As he passed the 400 block between Syborn and St. Paul Avenues, he heard a woman crying out for help. He stopped his car and he rushed into a nearby alley. There, he found 76-year-old Ida Lowry badly beaten and covered in blood. He tried to lift the poor woman, but she screamed in agony. He ran off and phoned the police. Just over an hour, the woman died at a nearby hospital. The murder of Ida Lowry was one of the most horrific crimes in the city's recent memory. She had been grabbed off the street, she was beaten and sexually assaulted with a blunt object, and left in the dirt to die. Talking to police, she could only say that her assailant had been a big white man who works at a bridge. She estimated that she had been laid in the alley for about 15 minutes between the attack and Smith happening upon her. She could provide no other information about the crime. The search for her killer began after she passed away. Officers combed the alleyway where she was found looking for clues, but came up with very little to any use. Beyond her vague description, there was nothing to indicate who had committed the awful act. In trying to piece together a profile of who Ida Lowry was, the police encountered even more mysteries. The Bloop. In 1997, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, recorded a sound underwater west of South America. Here is the sound now. It was suspected to be a creature of unknown size that was able to create such a loud blooping noise. While in the recording it wasn't loud, according to scientists, this bloop was caught from 5,000 kilometers away from the underwater microphones. Unfortunately, this remained a mystery on what caused it, but as of 2012, many scientists agree that they believe it was just simply an ice quake, or a giant piece of an iceberg just shifting in the water. But not everyone agrees that it's that simple. The Axeman of New Orleans. The Axeman of New Orleans was an unidentified American serial killer active in New Orleans, Louisiana. From May 1918 to October 1919, Italian immigrants and Italian Americans were targeted by this mysterious Axeman. The Axeman was never identified, and the murders remain unsolved. Some believe that the Axeman started their murders as early as 1911, as the murders were very similar to murders that happened in 1911, as well as some murders in Germany in 1922. The victims were usually attacked with an axe which actually often belonged to the victims themselves. In most cases, a panel on the back door of a home was removed by a chisel, which along with the panel was left on the floor near the door. The intruder then attacked one or more of the residents with either an axe or a straight razor. The crimes were not motivated by robbery, and the perpetrator never removed items from his victim's home. His crime spree stopped as mysteriously as it started. The murderer's identity remains unknown to this day, although various possible identifications of varying plausibility has been proposed. On March 13, 1919, a letter purporting to be from the Axeman has published in newspapers, saying that he would kill again at 15 minutes past midnight on the night of March 19th, but would spare the occupants of any place where a jazz band was playing. That night, all of New Orleans dance halls were filled at capacity, and professional and amateur bands played jazz at parties at hundreds of houses around town. There were no murders that night. Jenny Lo Chang. Jenny was last seen alive by her roommate on Sunday, September 11, 1977. Around 6 p.m. that night, she said she was going to the library to use one of their study rooms to get some work done. Only the basement level of the library was open at that time, and the study area there being open until 11 p.m. that night. No one present at the library of the night of September 11, 1977 remembers seeing Jenny, and she never returned to her dorm room. Her roommate reported her missing the next morning. When she realized Jenny was still gone at the library, a psychology professor entered a faculty reading room on the 4th floor where he made a horrific discovery. Jenny's nude, lifeless body was inside. She had been stabbed 30 times and beaten with a standing ashtray. Other sources claimed that she was strangled and that there was evidence of sexual assault. Her belongings were found in a neat pile nearby. The internet has run a little wild with theories on this case. The first suspect that comes up is often the infamous Zodiac Killer. This serial killer was never caught, and their identity is still unknown today. We know they were allegedly in correspondence with the police in the 60s and 70s, and their confirmed victims were all killed in the Bay Area. Their MOs was typically to brutally stab or shoot their victims. That does loosely fit here, but it should be noted that all the Zodiac's confirmed victims were killed in the 1960s, unless the Zodiac Killer happened to be a student or a staff member at SFSU. I don't see this theory as fitting. According to the contemporary reports, only 400 people had a key to the room in which Jenny was discovered. This considerably narrowed down suspects, but it was not ruled out that the door was left ajar or propped open to allow unrestricted access. Students and faculty were questioned, but no one saw or heard a thing. Jenny had no known enemies, nothing had seemed wrong at the time. Soon, the leads ran dry, and the case went cold. Father John Kerrigan. On August 5th, 1982, the Reverend Father John Patrick Kerrigan had served as a priest in Plains, Montana, before being transferred to the Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Ronan on July 18th, 1984. On the evening of July 20th, 2 days after Kerrigan's arrival and appointment in the church, he left a bakery in downtown Ronan. This was the last time he was seen. Kerrigan failed to report for his 6:30 a.m. Mass on July 21st, and a missing person report was filed on July 23rd. On July 29th, articles of bloody clothing were found lying alongside Montana Highway 35 on the shores of Flathead Lake near Polson. Along with a bloodied coat hanger, these items were located roughly 5 miles from Ronan. On July 30th, Kerrigan's vehicle, a brown Chevrolet Malibu, was discovered abandoned several miles away. In the trunk, his wallet, which contained $1,200 was found, along with a blood-stained shovel and pillowcase. Though Kerrigan's remains have never been recovered, he is believed to have been murdered. Because of this, and very lack of evidence, his killer has not been found, and the case went immediately cold. Cindy Song. Cindy Song grew up in South Korea in 1995. She moved to Virginia to live with her aunt and uncle and to attend high school. After graduating, she went to Pennsylvania State University. On Halloween 2001, she, now a senior, went to a costume party at the Players nightclub with two close friends, Stacy Pike and Lisa Kim. She was dressed as a Playboy bunny. All three partied until 2 a.m. the next morning, where they left and stopped off at a friend's apartment to play video games. At 4 a.m., they dropped Cindy off at her apartment. She was never seen again. A search of Cindy's apartments found no signs of a struggle or forced entry. The false eyelashes she had worn to the party were there, along with her backpack and cell phone. The only thing that were missing were her purse that contained her driver's license and credit cards. Police believed she was wearing her Playboy bunny costume when she vanished, as it was not found in her apartment. An analysis of her phone found that she had not made or received any phone calls after she was dropped off. There was no activity on her credit cards. Finally, there was no suspicious activity on her emails. Police and volunteers searched the wooded area near the campus. However, no trace of Cindy was found. Authorities don't believe that she ran off on her own. 2 Britney Spears concert tickets were found in her apartment. A printout for a computer that was due to receipt on November 6th was also found. Her friends and relatives don't believe she was the type of person to just disappear. They also did not believe she was depressed or suicidal. Her friends remembered that she was happy and upbeat on the night she vanished. Authorities believed that Cindy left her apartment to go to a 24-hour supermarket and that she was abducted there or on the way. Another theory was that she left her apartment with someone that she knew and then was killed by them. A few days after she disappeared, a woman matching her description was seen in Philadelphia being forced into a car by an unidentified man. Police do not know who he was or if the woman was her, but they would like to question him. A $27,000 reward is available for this case. To this day, Cindy Song has not been found. Todd McAfee. In the summer of 1986, 26-year-old Todd McAfee became the manager of an isolated 300-acre tomato farm located off State Road 70 near Mayaki City, Florida. The farm was owned by the Bonita Packing Company. He lived and had an office in a company trailer on the property. He was a hard worker who loved his job and had extensive knowledge on farming. He was also an avid gun collector and would often target shoot behind his home. It was well known in the area that he kept his valuable gun collection in his trailer. At 6:30 a.m. on the morning of August 18, 1987, the farm's migrant laborers arrived there and were surprised to find that Todd had not unlocked the gate for them. His assistant Adam Williams arrived a few minutes later and had to let them in. He was surprised because Todd would normally open the gate before their arrival. He then noticed Todd's truck parked in the front of his car near the trailer. He thought this was odd, as Todd normally parked it behind his car. By 7 a.m., there was still no sign of Todd. Adam went over to check inside his trailer. He noticed 2 empty handgun cases on the floor. He also noticed that the answering machine's tape was missing. However, the spindles were still spinning. He also noticed that the answering machine's tape was missing. 2 hours later, another farm employee found a bag of groceries in the front seat of Todd's truck. They appeared to have been left overnight. They also found a newly rented videotape. The keys were still in the ignition. Lying in the bed of the pickup truck was Todd's glasses, which were covered in blood. At around the same time, 2 miles away, some of the laborers were looking for water for their overheated truck when they discovered his body. He had been shot 4 times and dumped in a drainage ditch. Investigators determined that Todd had been shot with .22 caliber hollow point bullets. Spatters of blood were found in the sand near his body. This led them to believe that at least 2 people carried his body, placed it in the sand, then picked it up again and placed it in the ditch. Locals knew that the ditch was the home of the 15-foot alligator. It was speculated that the killers had hoped that the alligator would eat the body. However, the body was discovered before this could occur. Footprints were also discovered around the site. All of Todd's employees were interrogated and their shoes videotaped. No matches were found. Along with the bloody glasses, investigators found that the seat of Todd's truck was covered in blood. An empty gun case was also found on the truck's dashboard. Inside its ransacked trailer, they discovered that his gun collection, which included several handguns, rifles, and shotguns, was missing, along with a VCR and a few cameras. They suspected that he had been killed for his gun collection. A receipt found in the grocery bag of Todd's truck helped pinpoint the time of his death between 6:30 and 7 p.m. At around 6:15 p.m. on the night of August 17th, two of his friends passed by the trailer and noticed an orange van parked next to it. The orange van had been seen earlier at a local gas station. A customer had struck up a conversation with a female occupant of the van. One of the male occupants came out of the store, struck her repeatedly, and then forced her into the van. Another man also entered the van, and the three left. The witness was later put under hypnosis. She was able to give more detailed description of the van and the occupants. Investigators believe that on the night of August 17th, Todd was ambushed by the van's occupants after discovering his trailer was being burglarized. Tire tracks in his driveway showed that he sped up to the trailer, apparently realizing it was burglarized. His gun collection had been stolen the previous year. They believe he was shot and killed as he exited his truck outside of his trailer. They believe he was then placed back in his truck and driven to the ditch where he was dumped. His family has offered a $5,000 reward for information leading to the identity of the killers. Arthur Buddy Schumacher. This one does not have a lot of information, so I provide what I can find. Arthur Louis Buddy Schumacher, born in 1916, was an 8-year-old boy from Wisconsin who was found murdered in 1925. The murder had not been solved. He had an older sister, Jeanette Alice, who was born on April 11, 1915, and Buddy attended Lincoln Elementary School in Wisconsin. Schumacher went missing on July 24, 1925. He left his house with some neighborhood boys at about 9 a.m., and never returned. He was last seen by 3 of his friends after they hopped off a freight train they jumped to get a ride to a nearby swimming hole. For 7 weeks, the community and the state searched desperately to find the boy until his body was found just a mile from his house with his clothing torn and a handkerchief shoved down his throat. The police pursued several promising leads, but to no avail. The Hall Mills murder case. Edward Wheeler Hall, a priest, and Eleanor Mills, a member of his choir, and whom he was having an affair with, were murdered on September 14, 1922, in New Jersey, United States. Hall's wife and her brothers were accused of committing the murders, but were acquitted in a 1926 trial. In the history of journalism, the case is largely remembered for the vast extent of newspaper coverage it received nationwide. It has been regarded as an example of a media circus. On September 16, 1922, the body of Eleanor Mills, Edward Hall, were discovered in a field near a farm in New Jersey. Both bodies were on their backs, both shot in the head with a .32 caliber pistol. The man once and the woman 3 times. The bullet entered the man's head over his right ear and exited through the back of his neck. The woman was shot under the right eye, over the right temple, and over the right ear. A police officer at the scene noticed that the woman's throat had been severed and maggots were already in the wound. Indicating that the death occurred at least 24 hours earlier. The bodies appear to have been positioned side by side after death. Both had their feet pointing towards a crabapple tree. The man had a hat covering his face, and his calling card was placed at his feet. Torn up love letters were placed between the bodies. A jurisdictional issue complicated the initial investigation, as the crime scene was near the border between Somerset County and Middlesex County. Middlesex County police arrived first, but the crime scene was actually in Franklin Township, Somerset County. While the authorities addressed the confusion, curiosity seekers trampled the scene, took souvenirs, and passed Hall's calling card around. The physical evidence was thus severely compromised. So very similar to other murder stories, if you look up a lot of them that happened in the early 1900s, you will see that people get curious and will come in and touch potential evidence and could compromise an entire case and make it go cold. The Delphi Murders. On February 14, 2017, the bodies of Abigail Williams and Liberty German were discovered near the Monon High Bridge Trail, which is part of the Delphi Historic Trails in Delphi, Indiana. After the young girls had disappeared from the same trail the previous day, the murders have received significant media coverage because a video and audio recording of an individual believed to be the girls' killer were found on German's smartphone. Despite thousands of tips that have been sent to the police and the circulation of recordings of the suspect, no arrest in the case has been made. Police have not released details on how the girls were murdered. As early as February 15, 2017, Indiana State Police began circulating a still image of an individual reportedly seen on the Monon High Bridge Trail near where the two friends were slain. The grainy photograph appears to capture a Caucasian male, hands in pockets, walking on the rail bridge, heads down, towards the girls. A few days later, the person in the photograph was named the prime suspect in the double homicide. On February 22nd, law enforcement released an audio recording of the voice of the suspect, though in some degree muffled, is heard to say, "Down the hill." It was the news conference. The officials credited the source of the audio and imagery to German's smartphone, and further, regarded her as a hero for having had the presence of mind to fortify the secretly record for the exchange. Police indicated that the additional evidence from the phone had been secured, but they did not release it so as to not compromise any future trial. By this time, the reward in this case was set to $41,000. Investigators revealed they had reason to believe that the suspect might well be hiding in plain sight, and that the person is almost certainly familiar with the area of Delphi, whether it had been from living or working there or for another reason. An additional plea was made for help in identifying the driver of the vehicle left abandoned off the Holster Heartland Highway in Delphi, at the former Child Service Office. To this day, the murder has still not been solved.
Guys. Downhill. Guys. Downhill. Guys. Downhill.
I'm going to totally butcher this, so I apologize. Frock Leaves. On June 20th, 2006, the 21-year-old student nurse Frock Leeds disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The last known sighting of her was at a pub where she and a friend watched the FIFA World Cup match between England and Sweden. While Leeds was still at the pub, she borrowed a friend's mobile phone battery, as the battery on her own phone had been drained. She later returned her friend's battery before leaving the pub around 11 p.m. Since she probably had no more than €5 with her, she is believed to have been heading home on foot. The pub was about 1.5 kilometers away from her home. At 12:49 a.m., her housemate received a text message from Leeds' mobile phone saying that she would be home later. However, she did not return home that night, and when she also failed to appear to work the day after, her mother reported her missing. The police discovered that the text message had been sent from Neheim, a small city about 35 kilometers northeast of Paderborn. In the following days, Leeds called her housemate 5 times via her mobile phone. Police were unable to locate the calls, which all came from the different industrial areas of Paderborn. During these calls, Leeds continued to say that she would return home soon, but did not communicate any information about her situation. She provided only vague and evasive answers to questions. Leeds' last phone call was on June 27th in the presence of her sister, who also talked to her. During the conversation, she is said to have answered the question of whether she was being held captive with a faint yes, immediately followed by a loud no. Contact broke off after this phone call. On October 4, 2006, Leeds' skeletonized body was found by a hunter in the forested area. The body was found with the clothes she was wearing on the day of her disappearance. Her mobile phone, handbag, wallet, and wristwatch were not found. Due to the condition of the body, the time and cause of Leeds' death could not be determined. A case analysis by the police came to the conclusion that Leeds was probably held captive in the area around Neheim, and that the phone calls from Paderborn may have been diversionary maneuvers. No motive for her crime has been determined. Over 900 people who were connected with the victim were questioned by the police, and the initial investigation produced a list of 5 initial suspects. All 5 were eventually cleared after producing alibis. To this day, no one knows who captured Leeds, and no one knows why she was murdered. Statistics show that 88 women, kids, and men go missing by the hour. 2,130 people go missing every day, and 64,851 every month. And unfortunately, most of the time, these are currently left unsolved. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Juby Scott, and today we will be diving deeper into the Unsolved Crimes and Mysteries Iceberg. Grab a seat, relax, and get ready to dive down. Zygmunt Adamski. Zygmunt Adamski went missing in mysterious circumstances from his home in Thornfield Crescent at Tingley, near Wakefield, in June 1980. The 56-year-old miner at Lofthouse Colliery, who was known to many as Ziggy, had set off on June 6 on a walk to the local shops to buy groceries. It was the last time the Polish-born Mr. Adamski was seen alive. His wife Lottie's initial suspicion was that he had been kidnapped. 5 days after he disappeared, coal yard worker Trevor Parker found his body on top of a 10-foot-high pile of coal at his father's coal yard in Todmorden, around 20 miles from Tingley. He was wearing a suit, but his shirt was missing, as were his watch and wallet. His clothes were said to be improperly fastened, and he had only 1 day of beard growth. Mr. Adamski's hair had been cropped short in a roughly cut manner. His body was also covered in burn marks on his head, neck, and shoulders. His face, it was reported, showed absolute terror, but there were no injuries to explain the cause of death. The burns were said to be covered in a strange ointment which could not be identified by scientists. What had happened to him, and how did he end up in Todmorden? These questions haven't been answered, but this hasn't stopped speculation and the development of some quite outlandish theories. One tabloid newspaper suggests that Zygmunt had been abducted and killed by aliens and his body dumped on top of the coal pile. Others put forward theories that he had been killed by the KGB forces and had been left dazed and confused after being struck by ball lightning or some other unidentified phenomenon. The alien abduction theories were given a further boost by Alan Godfrey, the policeman who had been called to the Todmorden coal yard when Mr. Adamski's body had been found. In November 1980, 5 months after Mr. Adamski's body was found, Constable Godfrey had his own encounter with a UFO less than a mile away from the coal yard. The respected policeman made a sketch of the UFO and later, under hypnosis, told a story about being taken aboard the UFO and given a physical examination by 2 non-human entities. The policeman's UFO story made headlines around the world. Mr. Godfrey, now 70, told the examiner that the story he told under hypnosis was probably merely a dream, adding, "I never said I was abducted by aliens." However, he believes it's possible that Adamski was taken by aliens. Mr. Godfrey doesn't believe Mr. Adamski was murdered, although he said a more senior police colleague in 1980 believed he had been killed. He thinks that Mr. Adamski didn't die where he was found, but he had been placed there by someone or something. Mr. Godfrey added, he was on top of the coal pile on his back and not a bit of coal on him. His eyes were wide open and he had burn marks. Why would he climb up a stack of coal? To this day, no one knows what happened to Mr. Adamski. Terry Sutter. Terry Sutter was looking forward to spending some time with his friends at the movies and the local bowling alley on September 1st, 1973. But before he could do that, he had to finish his chores for the day, which included mowing someone's lawn. When he was done, he waited in vain for his mother to pick him up. When she didn't show up, he walked home. That evening, he joined his friends in Frankfort, Michigan, with strict instructions from his parents to be at his grandmother's house no later than 11 p.m. The next day, Terry's grandmother informed them that the 15-year-old never arrived at her house and she still hadn't heard anything from him. Terry's parents immediately informed the police that he was missing, but officers weren't especially worried and voiced their opinion that he was probably just hiding somewhere to avoid having to go to school. However, they soon regretted thinking this. That afternoon, a tourist stumbled upon Terry's body on the beach in Michigan. It soon became apparent that someone had held him down in the sand until he suffocated. His lungs and eyes were filled with sand. He also had multiple bruises on his head and neck. The teenager's parents were devastated, but requested minimal media coverage for the murder. They had their son buried in the Lake Township Cemetery, but their trauma was far from over. For some reason, Terry's grave kept being vandalized. Flower pots would be broken and plants ripped out. Things got so bad that Terry's parents eventually had his remains removed to an unmarked grave. It remains unknown who was responsible for Terry Sutter's death and whether his killer and the person who vandalized his grave were one and the same. Glenn and Bessie Hyde. Glenn and Bessie Hyde were newlyweds who disappeared while attempting to run the rapids at Colorado River through Grand Canyon, Arizona in 1928. Had the couple succeeded, Bessie Hyde would have been the first woman known to accomplish this feat. They were last seen Sunday, November 18th, 1928, when they boated away downriver below Hermit Rapid. The couple had hiked Bright Angel Trait out of the canyon to resupply a few days earlier. At the south rim, they approached photographer Emery Kolb at his studio and home on the canyon rim, where they were photographed before returning down into the canyon. The romance of the story, coupled with the lack of conclusive evidence at the fate of the hides, has led to a number of legends and rumors. An elderly woman on a commercial Grand Canyon rafting trip in 1971 announced to other rafters that she was Bessie Hyde and that she stabbed her abusive husband to death and escaped the canyon on her own. This was unlike what was known of Glenn Hyde. The woman later recanted the story. There was some speculation after the death of the famed rafter George Clark in May 1992 that she was really Bessie Hyde due to some documents and a pistol found in her effects after her death. But no conclusive evidence for such a link was ever found. Not to mention, Clark's early life was well documented. The skeletal remains of a young male found on the canyon rim in 1976 with a bullet inside the skull were later proven not to be those of Glenn Hyde. Suspicion had turned to photographer Emery Kolb because the remains were discovered on his property and he was one of the last persons known to have seen the couple alive. However, a forensic investigation conducted by the University of Arizona concluded that the skeleton belonged to a man no older than 22 who had died no earlier than 1972, ruling out the possibility of the remains of Glenn Hyde. In late 2008, a donation of photographs and documents to the Grand Canyon Museum collection, and an effort by the Coconino County Sheriff's Office to solve the county's cold cases were led to the identification of the cold skeleton as that of an unidentified suicide victim who was found in the park in 1933. Unfortunately, to this day, their bodies have not been found, and no one knows what happened to the Hydes. The Sodder children disappearance. For nearly 4 decades, anyone driving down Route 16 near Fayetteville, West Virginia, could see a billboard bearing the grainy images of 5 children, all dark-haired and solemn-eyed. Their names and ages: Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, Betty, 5. Stenciled beneath, along with the speculation of what happened to them. Fayetteville was and is a small town, with a main street that doesn't run longer than 100 yards, and rumors always played a larger role in the case than evidence. No one even agreed on whether the children were dead or alive. What everyone knew for certain was this: on Christmas Eve, 1945, George and Jenny Sodder and the 9 of their 10 children went to sleep. One son was away in the army. Around 1 a.m., a fire broke out. George and Jenny and 4 of their children escaped, but the other 5 were never seen again. George had tried to save them, breaking a window to re-enter the house, slicing a swath of his skin from his arm. He could see nothing through the smoke and fire, which had swept through all the downstairs rooms, living and dining room, kitchen, office, and his and Jenny's bedroom. He took frantic stock of what he knew. 2-year-old Sylvia, whose crib was in their bedroom, was safe outside, as was 17-year-old Marion and 2 sons, 23-year-old John and 16-year-old George Jr., who had fled the upstairs bedroom they shared, singeing their hair on the way out. He figured Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty still had to be up there, cowering in 2 bedrooms on either end of the hallway, separated by a staircase that was now engulfed in flames. He raced back outside, hoping to reach them through the upstairs window, but the ladder he always kept propped against the house was strangely missing. An idea struck. He would drive one of the 2 coal trucks up to the house and climb on top to reach the windows. But even though they'd functioned perfectly the day before, neither would start now. He ransacked his mind for another option. He tried to scoop water from the rain barrel, but found it was frozen solid. 5 of his children were stuck somewhere inside those great whipping ropes of smoke. He didn't notice that his arm was slick with blood, that his voice was hurt from screaming their names. His daughter Marion sprinted to a neighbor's home to call the Fayetteville Fire Department, but couldn't get any operator response. A neighbor who saw the blaze made a call from the nearby tavern, but again, no operator responded. Exasperated, the neighbor drove down into a town and tracked down Fire Chief F.J. Morris, who initiated Fayetteville's version of a fire alarm, a phone tree system, whereby one firefighter phoned another, who phoned another. The fire department was only 2.5 miles away, but a crew didn't arrive until 8 a.m., by which point the Sodders' home had been reduced to a smoking pile of ash. George and Jenny assumed that the 5 of their children were dead, but a brief search of the grounds on Christmas Day turned up no traces of remains. Chief Morris suggested that the blaze had not been hot enough to completely cremate their bodies. A state police inspector combed the rubble attributed to the fire to faulty wiring. George covered the basement with 5 feet of dirt, intending to preserve the site as a memorial. The coroner's office issued 5 death certificates just before the new year, attributing causes to fire or suffocation. But the Sodders had begun to wonder if their children were still alive. Jenny couldn't understand how 5 children could perish in a fire and leave no bones, no flesh, nothing. She conducted a private experiment, burning animal bones, chicken bones, beef joints, pork chop bones, to see if the fire consumed them. Each time she was left with a heap of charred bones. She knew the remains of various household appliances had been found in the burned out basement, still identifiable. An employee at a crematorium informed her that bones remain after bodies are burned for 2 hours at 2,000 degrees. Their house was destroyed in 45 minutes. Because of all the Friday the 13th spectacles that happened, the frozen water, the trucks not starting, the ladder being gone, and the fire department taking forever to show up to the fire, this murder mystery has baffled West Virginia for nearly 6 decades. So, I kind of believe in stuff like this, so just letting you know, I'm going to be abbreviating this name as SPCG. SPCG is a collective name given to a broad range of paranormal pneumonia attributed to a corruptive entity which infects weak and vulnerable people through the solar plexus chakra. Originally used by the 80s New Age practitioners, the pneumonia was linked to a horror-themed email forwardable in the late 90s which claimed to be simply reading or hearing the words SPCG made one susceptible to infection. Others claim that one became infected through viewing a set of spooky black and white images circulating online. Rather than a material cryptid SPCG, it makes itself known through images and words. The SPCG appears to feed off human misery, bombarding its host human with realistic hallucinations, glitches in reality, and weakening them emotionally. They then simply drive the host beyond the fullest capacity of the psychological pain. The sickness that comes with SPCG contact is described as similar to meth addicts' experiences of withdrawal paranoia symptoms, up to and including near constant full-body hallucinatory experiences and actual psychosis. The reported effects are also similar to delirium estates. Camera heads. Camera heads are said to be human or human-like entities have had a camera implemented into their inner nerves of their eyes. As such, they are walking surveillance systems, although to what end is unknown. They are best known for their antagonists of an early creepypasta which was subsequently lost. The pasta/ARG is partially found within the discovery of one of the associated YouTube videos and the first post preserved in Xenopedia Wiki. They are described to be similar to Slenderman in behavior, stalking their victims with vague, malefic intent. Supposedly, camera heads predate Slenderman, although no mention of them exists before 2009. In some regulations, the camera heads appear outwardly human, perhaps even unwittingly serving as surveillance. In other accounts, the camera formed the whole head. One regulation stated that they were biomechanical. It seems like this one's mostly just a creepypasta, so I won't take too much time on it. The Mystery of Room 1046. On January 2nd, 1935, at 1:20 p.m., a lone man checked into the President Hotel in downtown Kansas City. He had no luggage besides a comb and a toothbrush and asked for an interior room on a high floor of the hotel. He checked in under the name Roland T. Owen and complained to the bellboy about the outrageous prices of a neighboring hotel. After checking in and receiving his room 1046 on the 10th floor, he left the hotel, only to be seen intermittently throughout his stay. Though the man's behavior struck the President's hotel staff as odd, they didn't think much of him. After all, the hotel often played host to out-of-towners and businessmen looking for some late-night company, and the less the staff that got involved, the better. The staff wouldn't give his behavior another thought until 6 days later, when the man turned up dead. His hotel room a brutal bloodbath, as they described to police the brutal scene. Questions arose to the man's behavior prior to his death, bringing to light just how strange that behavior had been. On January 3rd, one day after Owen checked into the hotel maid, Mary Soptic, stopped by to clean his room. It was around noon, and most of the hotel's residents were out for the day. However, upon reaching Owen's room, Soptic found the door to be locked from the inside. She knocked and Owen opened the door. After insisting she could come back later, Soptic eventually entered. She found the room in almost complete darkness, with the shades tightly drawn and the only light coming from a small, dim table lamp. As she cleaned, Owen mentioned that he had a friend coming to visit him shortly, and would she mind not locking the door? Soptic agreed, and Owen left the room. 4 hours later, Soptic returned to room 1046 with fresh towels. She found the door still unlocked from when she had cleaned the room that afternoon, and upon entering, found Owen laying fully clothed on top of his still-made bed, seemingly asleep. A note on his bedside table read, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." The next morning, January 4th, Soptic's strange interactions with room 1046 continued. Around 10:30 a.m., she stopped by to make the beds and found Owen's door to be locked from the outside, as it would be when patrons left. Assuming Owen was not inside, she opened the door with her master key. To her surprise, Owen was sitting inside, in the dark, in the chair in the corner of the room. As she cleaned, the phone rang, and Owen picked it up. "No, Don, I don't want to eat. I am not hungry. I just had breakfast," he said. After a moment, he repeated, "No, I am not hungry." After he hung up, Owen began interrogating Soptic about her job and the hotel. The first time he had ever really spoken to her. He asked her about how many rooms she was in charge of, what kind of people lived in President Hotel, if any, and again complained about the price of a neighboring hotel. Soptic answered quickly, finished cleaning, and left Owen alone in room 1046. It was only after she left that she realized that the door had been locked from the outside. Someone had to have locked Owen in his room. Later that day, Soptic returned with fresh towels, having taken the ones from the room that morning. However, as she knocked this time, she heard two voices in the room, rather than just Owen. When she announced that she had fresh towels, a loud, deep voice told her to leave, claiming that they had enough towels. Though she knew she had removed all the towels from the room that morning, Soptic left the two men alone, not wishing to intrude on what was clearly a sensitive and private conversation. That same afternoon, the President Hotel got two more guests whose presence would contribute greatly to the mystery of what happened to Roland T. Owen in room 1046. The first was Jean Owen, of no relation to Roland. She had come to Kansas to meet her boyfriend for the day and decided that rather than drive all the way back up from her hometown on the outskirts of the city, she would stay the night at the hotel. Upon checking into the President Hotel, Jean Owen was given the room key to 1048, right next to Roland. That night, according to police statements, she heard repeated commotion. She heard a lot of strange noises which sounded like it was on the same floor, and that consisted largely of two men and women talking loudly and cursing. When the noise continued, I was about to call the desk clerk, but decided not to. The other hotel guests were not quite a guest at all. The bellhop who had been on duty that night described her as a commercial woman who often frequented the rooms of the hotel's male patrons late at night. On the evening of January 4th, she came to the hotel searching for a man in room 1026. However, despite being a very prompt customer, the woman couldn't seem to find the man she was looking for. After searching for well over an hour on multiple floors, she gave up and went home. Both of the women's statements would raise more questions about the fate of the man in the room 1046. The next morning, the bellhop received a call from the hotel's telephone operator. The phone in room 1046 had been off the hook for 10 minutes without anyone using it. The bellhop went up to check on Owen and noticed that the door was locked with a "Do Not Disturb" sign hung on the doorknob. He knocked on the door and Owen told him to come in. However, when the bellhop told Owen that the door was locked, he got no response. The bellhop knocked once again, then yelled for Owen to hang up the phone, assuming Owen had simply been drunk and knocked it off the hook. However, an hour and a half later, the telephone operator called the bellhop again. The phone in room 1046 was still off the hook and hadn't been hung up at all. This time, the bellhop let himself into Owen's room with the master key. The man had been lying naked on the bed, seemingly drunk, not wishing to deal with him. The bellhop simply straightened the phone, placed it on the back of the hook, and locked the door behind him, reporting Owen to the manager. To his surprise, an hour later, the telephone operator called again. The phone was again off the hook, though not in use. This time, when the bellhop opened the door, he found a bloodbath. Owen was sitting curled in the corner of the room, his head in his hands, suffering multiple stab wounds. The bed sheets and towels were stained with blood, and the walls were splattered with it. The bellhop immediately called the police, who took Owen straight to the hospital, where doctors discovered that Owen had been tortured viciously. His arms, legs, and neck had been restrained by some kind of cord, and his chest sustained multiple stab wounds. He also suffered a punctured lung and a fractured skull. Roland T. Owen was pronounced dead at the hospital shortly after arriving. The doctors also discovered that the wounds on Owen had been inflicted well before the bellhop's first trip to Owen's room that morning. They ascertained that he had attempted to call for help multiple times, but hadn't been able to make it farther than picking up the phone due to his injuries. When investigators searched the room, the strangeness continued. There were no clues in the room at all, and nothing matching the description of Roland Owen when he checked in. The hotel amenities such as soap and toothpaste were also missing, as well as anything that could have been the murder weapon. The only thing of note the detectives found were 4 small fingerprints on the telephone stand, though they were never identified. Furthermore, detectives found that Roland T. Owen never existed. There was no records of any such man having lived anywhere in the United States, and they implored the public to come forward with any information they had about the mysterious murder victim. Shortly thereafter, the neighboring hotel that Owen had complained so much about came forward, claiming that a man matching the description had stayed at the hotel on January 1st. He had checked in under the name of Eugene K. Scott. However, upon further investigation, the police reached the same dead end with the Roland T. Owen. No man named Eugene K. Scott had any record of ever existing. Over the next couple of months, various people identified the body as a loved one, though none of the identification struck. Finally, the case ran cold, and the detectives decided to bury the body. As they arranged for a small funeral, a bouquet of flowers and a donation to cover the funeral costs showed up at the funeral home with a letter that only read, "Love forever, Lucille." To this day, the case remains unsolved, opened yearly by the Kansas police as new pieces of evidence unfold. For the time being, however, it seems that the mystery of the room 1046 may never truly be solved. Malakia Logan. On the evening of May 15th, 1988, 8-year-old Malakia Logan and her sister went to play in the basketball court of a park near their apartment in Greenwood, South Carolina. At around 8:15 p.m., she left on her bicycle and headed back home, which was just 300 yards away. She never arrived and was never seen again. Her bike was later found near the apartment office. This case remains unsolved. On October 1st, 1990, Malakia's remains were found in the wooded area in the U.S. Forest Service property in Newberry County. However, they were not positively identified until 1998, 10 years after she vanished. DNA testing confirmed her identity. In November 2002, 50-year-old Charles Wade Hampton was charged with murder, abduction, and sexual misconduct in relation to this case. He confessed to her murder and the rape and the murders of at least 2 other people. However, he later recanted at the time he was serving time for peeping Tom crimes. He had been a suspect in this case since 1996. However, in June 2007, the charges against him were dropped. DNA testing ruled him out in one of the other murders, and investigators did not have any evidence to corroborate his confession to Malakia's murder. However, Hampton did plead guilty to obstruction of justice, and he was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Prosecutors noted that they could charge him again if new evidence was surfaced. What happened to Malakia Logan? Who killed her? And where did she disappear to? The Buckskin Girl. On April 24th, 1981, the body of an unidentified young woman was found in a ditch alongside Greenlee Road in Troy, Ohio. She had died between 1 or 2 days prior. She had been strangled and beaten. She had no socks, shoes, or any form of identification. She was wearing a brown and orange turtleneck sweater, Wrangler brand jeans, and a distinct buckskin poncho that led to her nickname. She was believed to have been between the ages of 18 and 26. She was 5 foot 6 inches and weighed 130 pounds. She had reddish-brown hair in braids, she had light brown eyes, and freckles across her face. It is believed that the woman was a victim of the Ohio prostitute killer, who was possibly a man that went by Dr. No on a CB radio that may have been preyed on prostitutes at truck stops throughout Ohio. She may have been the first victim of the murders, which took place until 1990. Some suggest that she was a victim of domestic violence and was not connected to the other murders, as there was no evidence that she was a prostitute. Several sketches and reconstructions were later created of the woman. Her case was also taken on by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Pollen testing indicated that she traveled across the country, and isotope testing indicated that she grew up in the northeastern part of the United States, or perhaps Canada. In 2017, this case was taken up by the DNA Doe Project. They uploaded her DNA to the GED match, which allowed them to use new genetic genealogy to determine the woman's identity and ancestry. In April 2018, thanks to the project, she was identified as 21-year-old Marcia Lenore Sissoman King. She regularly hitchhiked and vanished after leaving her Little Rock, Arkansas home in 1980. Sadly, her father died shortly before she was identified. However, her mother was still living in the home where Marcia had grown up. She had never moved or changed her phone number in hopes that Marcia would someday return or call her. Law enforcement confirmed Marcia's identity at a press conference. They also stated that they hoped to hear from people who knew her when she was in Louisville, Kentucky, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Since then, they have been able to determine her whereabouts, relationships, and other vital information in the weeks leading up to her murder. They hope to identify her killer by extracting DNA from hairs found at the crime scene. The case of the embalmed severed head. In December 2014, a severed head was discovered in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, in a field approximately 10 yards from the nearest road. Cadaver dogs are brought in, but only the head can be located. Police eventually determined the head was specifically placed there rather than through accidental means or animal intervention. The head was professionally severed and embalmed, but there are two facts that suggest that the procedure may not have been performed by someone with formal training or as part of their vocation. First, though the internal cuts around the spine suggest a skilled hand, the cuts through the outermost layers of skin and muscle were rather ragged and unpracticed looking. Secondly, and the fact that made this case noteworthy, the eyeballs of the head have been removed and replaced with rubber bouncy balls from a gumball machine. Obviously, this was not the practice of coroners or other such professionals. Police tried in vain for a year to determine who this Jane Doe was. Their official determination was the head was a product of an illegal black market body trade, though many detectives still suspect foul play. In December 2015, the head was buried in a local graveyard. Unfortunately, to this day, the severed head's identity and what happened has been unsolved. Paula Jean Weldon. December 1st, 1946, Paula Jean Weldon, 18, finished her job at the Commons at Bennington College in Vermont. She worked 2 shifts in the dining hall and then returned to her room in the Dewey Hall dorm and changed her clothes and told her roommate she was going for a long hike. Her roommate remembered Paula saying she was feeling a bit depressed in the days before and she had not gone home over Thanksgiving for reasons unknown. Paula was the eldest of 4 daughters of William Archibald Weldon of Stamford, Connecticut, who was a design engineer at Revere Copper and Brass. Her sisters were Steph, 14, Pamela, 16, and Heather, 5. She was 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed 123 pounds and had a grayish scar on her left knee, a vaccination mark on the right thigh, as well as a small scar under the left eye under eyebrow. She enjoyed swimming, biking, skating, hiking, camping, square dancing, and playing the guitar, and was interested in botany. Paula was wearing a red parka jacket with fur-trimmed hood, blue jeans, white sneakers with heavy-soled topsider size 6.5 or 7. She was also wearing a small gold-aligned ladies' wristwatch with narrow black band. This watch has repairer's marking 13050 HD scratched on the inside of the back case. It was 50 degrees on Sunday when Paula left for college, explaining her light clothing. But by the evening it grew much colder and windier with snow. By Monday it was 9 degrees in Bennington with a wind. She was seen by several other college students heading down towards Route 67A, Danny Fager, at the service station across the college entrance. Danny Fager, at the service station across the college entrance, saw her walk down the drive about 2:30 p.m., turn to her right and run up a small knoll at the college entrance, run back down, and walk down Route 67A towards Bennington. Louise Knapp picked her up at about 2:45 p.m. and took her as far as his home on Route 9, about 3 miles from the long trail where she planned to hike. About 30 minutes later, at around 4 p.m., Ernest Whiteman and 3 friends coming out of a camp in Bigford Hollow saw Paula, and she asked Ernie about the length of the trail. Before they saw her head down towards the bridge leading to the trail, several other Woodford residents claimed to have seen her in the vicinity of Fay Fuller Camp, but the reliability of these reports is uncertain. With darkness descending around 4:30 p.m., she was on the trail with inadequate clothing and no supplies. She was never seen again. After Paula failed to show up for classes on Monday, December 2nd, Mary Garrett, Director of Admissions, called State Attorney William Trevor Jerome Jr. to the college at noon. Paula's father, William, also arrived that day. Paula had once said that she would like to visit the Everett Cave on Mount Anthony, so Henry Steele of Flandale Farms, working as a guide with some of the students, headed to the cave area that afternoon, but found nothing. Abe Ruskin, a local taxi driver, stated he had taken a student to the bus station on Sunday afternoon, but couldn't positively identify her as Paula. There were several buses she could have taken: Pittsfield, New York City, Albany, or Burlington. The clerk at the station didn't remember anyone of her description, but it was a busy day. A waitress at the modern restaurant on Pleasant Street called Aura Taylor served on a girl matching Paula's description at 9:30 p.m. Aura said that the girl was with a young man of about 25 who was drunk and abusive. When he went to the counter, the girl signaled Aura to come over. She asked how far it was to Bennington, Vermont, and then asked where she was. She said she had to get to Bennington and that she had arrived in Fall River with $1,000 but had nothing left. The girl had not been drinking but seemed dazed. That evening, the media put out her story, and authorities in New York and Massachusetts were alerted, and photographs circulated. As no one knew where Paula might have gone, no formal search and rescue effort was started. To this day, she remains missing. The Monster of Florence. The Monster of Florence is a name commonly used by the Italian media for an unidentified serial killer active within the province of Florence between 1968 and 1985. The monster murdered 14 victims, usually young couples, secluded in the search of intimacy in wooded areas during new moons. Law enforcement conducted several investigations into the cases over the course of several years. In 2000, courts convicted 2 individuals for 4 of the double homicides. They had been charged with being part of an alleged group of murderers who became known as the Snacks Companions. Multiple weapons were used in the murders, including a .22 caliber Beretta handgun and a knife, and in half of the cases, sex organs were excised from the bodies of the female victims, the removal of which to be appeared for the motive of their crimes. To this day, the murderer has not been apprehended. Doll that grew old. After 11 years of being confined to the house's attic, the doll had somehow aged and decayed, going from an adorable childlike doll to a withered doll resembling an old man. Apparently, the location of this doll is currently unknown. The case of Diao Aquin. Diao Aquin, a 19-year-old first-year student at Nanjing's University Adult Education College, was last seen alive on January 10, 1996, when she left her dorm building after an argument with the building's management. 9 days later, her body, which had been boiled and cut into more than 2,000 pieces and wrapped in bags, were found in 8 locations on and near the university campus. The brutality of the murder shocked China, but the killer was never caught. Blinking Crucifix. Throughout the 20th century, the Catholic Church investigated numerous miracles throughout the world. One of the most well-known instances was the Fatima miracle that occurred in Fatima, Portugal in 1917. That year, 3 children claimed that God promised to show proof of his existence. On the specific day and time promised, hundreds witnessed as the sun apparently fell from the sky and touched the earth. Today, thousands mark an annual pilgrimage to Fatima to celebrate this divine occurrence. More recently, another miracle reportedly took place in Yugoslavian village of Medjugorje. I totally butchered that, I'm sorry. Starting in 1981, several young men and women reported being visited by the Virgin Mary. However, many churchgoers in Ambridge, Pennsylvania claim that a miracle has taken place in their own town. Ambridge is located 20 miles north of Pittsburgh. The area surrounding it has slowly been dying due to the closure of steel mills. However, many of the residents refuse to leave the town. Several of them gathered together at the Holy Trinity Church. The church is proud of its suspended crucifix, which has been there since 1931. It was refurbished in January of 1989 by local artist Dominic Leo. He worked for several hours to bring the crucifix back to original form. He paid particular attention when painting Jesus' eyes. On March 24, 1989, a special 3-hour mass was held at the church to commemorate Good Friday. Over 300 Catholics in the prayer group were at the church that day to celebrate mass. Jim was the nephew of the parish priest that day. He was serving as an altar boy while he was praying during Holy Communion. He looked up and made a stunning discovery. The eyes of the crucifix, which were normally open, now appeared to be closed. He had feelings of happiness and shock. Jim told his brother Tom to look as well. He confirmed that the eyes appeared to be closed. However, he was not sure if it was been the trick of the light. Jim went to the other side of the altar to confirm this. When he got there, he looked up and the eyes still appeared to be closed. After the end of the Mass, the brothers began crying. Their uncle, Reverend Vincent, asked them what was wrong, and he told them that the eyes on the crucifix were closed. Vincent and another priest went to look at the eyes, and both confirmed that the eyes appeared to be closed. Vincent called for Dominic to come and look at the crucifix as well. When he looked up, he was shocked to see that their eyes were closed. It appeared to him that the eyes were moving and the tears were coming from them. He began to cry as well. Since the crucifix was suspended 22 feet in the air, a ladder was brought in to allow for a closer look. Dominic was the first one to look closer at the crucifix. He saw that the left eye was completely closed and the right eye was slightly open. Another passenger, State Trooper Chris Marion, was skeptical. He wanted to make sure that no one had tampered with the crucifix. However, when he got up the ladder to look at the eyes, he was certain that it was not a hoax. Sue, another member of the prayer group, was familiar with the crucifix when previously in an enclave area with a light-able candle. She often saw it there. She was certain that the eyes were open every day until Good Friday. That night, as he stood behind the crucifix, another passenger claimed that he received a divine message. He wrote it down to share it with his fellow believers. In red, in part, "I have given this sign for all those who have faithfully come. Truly, my presence is within this church. Within the months to come, many will flock to see what I have done. Welcome them, just as people of Medjugorje welcome those who flocked to see my mother." Interestingly, many of the Holy Trinity Church parishioners are Yugoslavian descent, which is where Medjugorje is located. 4 former Ambridge priests were born in Medjugorje. Although the members of the Holy Trinity Church are convinced that a miracle took place, others are skeptical. They believe that the miracle may have been a hallucination or a hoax. Since March 24th, thousands of people had flocked to the church to see the crucifix for themselves. Even if it didn't blink, many people believe that a miracle still occurred, as the blinking crucifix brought many Ambridge parishioners away from their town's sadness and despair. Jack the Stripper. Jack the Stripper's bodies were found with clothing removed, sometimes stripped so bare that even their false teeth were taken. All the victims were sex workers, all were small of stature, and all showing no signs of struggle. The local press began calling the uncaught killer Jack the Stripper, an ode to Jack the Ripper, who had terrorized London's sex workers about 75 years prior. The homage would end up serving as a foreshadow. Like Jack the Ripper, Jack the Stripper's case was never solved. It wasn't for the lack of trying. There was hardly any evidence. Despite the victims being stripped, investigators didn't see signs of rape or sexual assault at the murder scenes. There were patterns on how the women were killed. For example, the killer seemed to use the victim's own clothing to strangle them. Occasionally, a victim would be punched, but none of these evidence helped to narrow the search. The investigation caught a small break when the 5th victim, 22-year-old Helen Bartholomew, was found with flecks of paint on her body. Forensic investigators determined that the pigment appeared to come from a spray paint gun used to fix dinged-up cars at auto body repair shops. 2 subsequent victims had the same paint flecks on them, leading investigators to believe that the killer worked in an auto repair. Another tip came in on the killer's vehicle. On July 14, 1964, at around 2:30 a.m., 2 men painting a restaurant interior saw a suspicious figure with a gray van in the restaurant's parking lot. After they called out to him, the man, startled, drove off. A few hours later, the body of Mary Fleming was found in the cul-de-sac, a 10-minute drive away. Police began scanning the roadways for grain vans, but the clue never led anywhere. Investigators found themselves at a dead end, and Jack the Stripper was never caught. The Seattle Arsonist. In September 9, 1989, Blackstark Lumber Company was set fire. This unidentified arsonist has been connected to over 20 fires in and around Seattle. The Blackstark Lumber fire occurred around 10 p.m. 20 fire trucks responded to the 4-alarm blaze. When the first truck arrived, the fire appeared to be controllable. However, the fire soon spread to other parts of the lumberyard and became one of the biggest fires in recent Seattle history. 22-year-old Matt Johnson and his partner Bill Meredith were 2 of the first firefighters inside the building. The roof had exploded while they were inside. Both Matt and Bill were overcome by intense heat. The lack of oxygen and the intense heat left Matt unable to move. Bill became lost and disoriented in the fire, but eventually was able to escape. Tragically, Matt's body was found in the rubble the next day. Matt left behind a wife and a 15-month-old son. At first, fire investigators assumed that the fire had been started accidentally by a vagrant that was trying to keep warm. Investigator Dennis Fowler, however, discovered a pattern in the ruins that matched the signature of a serial arsonist that they had been tracking for years. Fowler first encountered the arsonist in 1984 when Seattle's Carpet Exchange warehouse burned down in less than 20 minutes. The fire was so intense that it melted concrete and warped steel beams. After the Blackstark Lumberyard fire, the Seattle Fire Department began investigating on a national scale. They found at least 20 other fires in both the United States and Canada that seemed to be started by the same individual, known as the King of Arsonists. The fires set by the arsonists were especially dangerous because the oxygen in their water only made the fire burn faster and hotter. One factor that made the arsonist too difficult to track was that he used a fuel of unknown origin, an accelerant that left behind no residue, called a high-temperature accelerant, or HTA. It generated temperatures between 5,000 and 7,000 degrees, 3 times hotter than a normal fire. A series of tests were done with various types of fuels in order to determine which one the arsonist used. On March 25, 1990, the Seattle Fire Department set a test fire in an empty shopping center. The entire complex was destroyed within minutes. The fire helped narrow down the types of fuel that the arsonist used. The fuel, which the Seattle Fire Department has kept a secret, was a mixture of several common ingredients that were readily available. However, only someone with specific knowledge of chemistry would know how to put all the ingredients together. Fowler believes that the arsonist actually hires other people to set the fires. The only fire that produced eyewitnesses was the Blackstock Lumberyard fire. One eyewitness had read about the fire in the newspaper and realized that he had been in the area about 15 minutes prior to when the alarm was called in. He was driving along the road to the lumberyard when he noticed a 1970s or 1980s Mercedes coming out of the parking lot at the lumberyard. He felt that this was unusual because of the time of night. Another eyewitness claimed that she saw a suspicious man after the fire was set. While the crowds were looking at the fire in progress, the man was apparently walking away from the area, paying no attention to the large fire nearby. She felt that the man's actions were suspicious. Investigators believed that the man was the arsonist and that he had set the fire and waited until crowds gathered before he walked away from the scene. Under hypnosis, the 2 eyewitnesses described 2 different men. Both are not considered suspects, but police would like to question them. The man driving the Mercedes and the man seen leaving the fire. The arson fire has claimed the lives of at least 2 firefighters, Matt Johnson and Paul Heidenreich, who died in the 1982 warehouse fire. The fires have taken place in Spokane, Yakima, Seattle, and Bellingham, as well as in California, Florida, and British Columbia. Authorities are currently investigating suspicious insurance claims for fires across the nation for connections to the arsonist. The status of this case is still unsolved. Charles Morgan. 39-year-old Chuck Morgan was a successful businessman who was the president of his own escrow agency. He was also a potential witness in a state land fraud case involving a known crime boss. On March 22, 1977, he left his Tucson, Arizona home to drive 2 of his daughters to school. After dropping them off, he vanished. 3 days later, he arrived back at his home. According to his wife, Ruth, he was missing a shoe, had a plastic handcuff around one ankle, and had his hands tied together with a plastic zip tie. He could not speak, but with pen and paper, he wrote down that he had been kidnapped and tortured. He also wrote that a hallucinogenic drug had been painted on his throat. He claimed that this drug would drive him insane or kill him if he ingested it. He asked Ruth to move his car because he did not want them to know that he had returned home. However, he did not say who they were. He also told her not to call the police because a hit would be put out on the lives of them and their family members. For 1 week, Ruth nursed Chuck back to health by feeding him with an eyedropper. Before his voice returned, he began to allude to a secret identity. He claimed that he had worked as an agent for the federal government and he fought against organized crime. He also claimed that they had taken his treasury identification. He said that he escaped from his captors near Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. After his kidnapping, Chuck became justifiably paranoid. He began wearing a bulletproof vest and even grew a beard to further mask his identity. He also started driving his daughters to and from school. He informed the school that nobody else should be allowed to pick them up. On June 7, 2 months after his initial disappearance, Chuck vanished again. Shortly before his second disappearance, he told his father that if anything were to happen to him, there was a letter that he had written that would tell them who was responsible. The letter was never found. However, 9 days later, an unidentified woman called Ruth and said, "Chuck is all right. Ecclesiastes 12, 1-8. This is a reference to a Bible passage, which reads in part, "Men are afraid of a high place and of terrors on the road. Remember him before the silver cord is broken and the golden bull is crushed. Then the dust will return to earth as if it was, the spirit will return to God who gave it." 2 days later, Chuck was found shot to death despite the fact that he was found wearing a bulletproof vest. His body was found in the desert 30 feet off the highway in the San Juan Springs area. He had been shot once in the back of the head with a bullet from his .357 Magnum, which was lying beside him. No fingerprints were found on it. Gunshot residue was found on his left hand, indicating he had fired a weapon. In his car, police found a note that had directions to a crime scene written in his handwriting. Also found in the car were several weapons, ammunition, and a CB radio. Strangely, a piece of one of his teeth was found wrapped in a white handkerchief in the back seat. A pair of sunglasses was also found that did not belong to him. Strangely, Chuck had clipped a $2 bill inside his underwear. Written on the bill were 7 Spanish names from the letters A to G. Also, the Bible passage was written with the verses 1 through 8 marked by arrows drawn on the bill's serial number. This was the same reference that the female caller had made to Ruth. On the back of the bill, the signers of the Declaration of Independence was numbered 1 through 7. Also, a crude map was drawn which showed several roads between Tuscan and the Mexican border. The town Ravels Junction and Sasabe were marked. The towns are apparently known for smuggling. 2 days after Chuck's death, an anonymous woman spoke to an officer from the Pima County Sheriff's Department on the telephone. She claimed that he was supposed to meet her at a local motel shortly before he died. She claimed that her nickname was Green Eyes, and that she was the same woman that had called Root several days earlier. She also claimed that at the motel, Chuck showed her a briefcase containing several $1,000s in cash. He said the money would buy him out of a gang contract that had been put out on his life. Surprisingly, despite the bizarre evidence, authorities ruled that Chuck committed suicide. They believed that he did so either because of financial difficulties or fears for his safety. His family and a reporter named Don Duvo believed he was murdered. Some investigators also suspect that his death was not a suicide. Shortly after Chuck's death, his impounded car was broken into while it was in a police possession. Around that same time, his office was also ransacked. 3 weeks after his death, 2 men claiming to be FBI agents arrived at the Morgans' home. They told Ruth that they had to look through the house. They tore the house apart and searched for quite a while. It is unknown if they ever found anything or if they were even FBI agents. While DeVoe contacted the FBI, they claimed that they had never even heard of Chuck Morgan. There are several rumors surrounding this case, including that Chuck was killed because he was involved with illegal activity or was doing secret work for the government. His death seems just as unexplained as the events leading to it. The Boston Rapist. Police in Boston, Massachusetts are searching for a man who has struck several strip malls in the area, robbing employees and raping some of the women there. He has been referred to as the Strip Mall Rapist. The first known case occurred at a small downtown Boston store at 4 p.m. on December 16, 1989. He sexually assaulted an employee of the store. Another attack occurred a few weeks later on Christmas Eve, December 24th. In the late afternoon, shortly before closing time, the assailant walked into the medical clinic in the mall in Braintree, 20 miles south of Boston. While talking to a nurse at the front desk, his beeper went off. He excused himself to a nearby phone. Shortly afterwards, he went behind the reception area and asked where he could throw away a piece of trash. He then placed a gun to her back and told her to not get excited and cooperate with him. He also said that he was not afraid to use the gun on her. Because it was Christmas Eve, the clinic was nearly deserted and there were only 3 employees there. The assailant herded them into one room. He forced a female lab technician to take the hands of the doctor and the nurse behind their backs, leaving the nurse behind. He placed the doctor in one room and took the lab technician to the office cash box, where he forced her to give him $1,600 from it. Next, he then took her into an examining room where he forced her to take off her clothes. He then brutally sexually assaulted her. 3 days later, on December 27th, the assailant struck again at a woman's clothing store along Route 9 in the Framingham shopping mall. The location was similar to the previous one. That morning, he entered the store asking an 18-year-old employee, Julie, about gift certificates. He claimed that he was looking for something for his girlfriend. He asked the manager, Tracy, to come over and help them. She had a creepy feeling about him, but was not too concerned. She hoped to help him and get him out of the store as soon as possible. When she got near him, he started picking up the outfits for them to look at. As she turned to the clothing rack, he pulled out a gun and stuck it in her back. He asked for their names and then called Julie over. He told her that he had a .357 pointed at Tracy's back and he would shoot her if he did not cooperate. He forced them into the back of the store, telling them to not look at him along the way. He struck them in the head with a gun when they tried to look at him. Once in the back, he demanded money from the safe and made Tracy put it in a brown paper bag. He then told Julie to slowly lay face on the floor, which she did. He told her to stay in the back while he took Tracy to the bathroom. He demanded that she take off her clothes and stay in the bathroom. Next, he forced Julie to lock the front doors of the store. After that, he took her at gunpoint to one of the dressing rooms. He forced her to undress and kick her clothes out of the dressing room. He then had her go into the office. He placed a gun on the back of her head and then he sexually assaulted her. No witnesses observed his departure. After the attack, the victims escaped out of the back door and went to a nearby house to call for help. Sadly, his victims were extremely traumatized as the result of the crime. Some still have nightmares about their attacks and have trouble sleeping as a result. They hope that someone will be able to identify him. The Bird Road Rapist. Between 1977 and 1979, a man dubbed the Bird Road Rapist kidnapped and sexually assaulted several women throughout different cities in Florida. In 1980, a cook named Luis Diaz was ID'd by one of the victims as the rapist. Diaz was brought in for questioning, but police could find no evidence at first that he was the rapist, especially because he did not fit the look of the rapist. A few weeks later, several victims ID'd him as well, and he was arrested. In 1980, Diaz was convicted of the rapes and sentenced to life in prison. Although several sequences of evidence started to surface saying that Diaz was actually innocent, including several bystanders who later concluded that Diaz was not the assailant. Despite this, Diaz remained in prison and the real Bird Road Rapist remains at large. In 2005, after 25 years in prison, Luis Diaz was released after DNA found on the victims did not ID him as the rapist, and the real Bird Road Rapist has never been caught nor ID'd. Ohio prostitute murder. In Ohio, police are searching for a serial killer who is suspected of murdering at least 8 prostitutes throughout the state. In 1990, the body of an unknown white female was found off the Interstate 75 behind a truck stop. 4 years earlier, the body of a prostitute named Shirley Dean Taylor, 33, was found 100 miles away from behind a traffic barrier. Although the two cases at first seemed to be completely isolated crimes, investigative reporter Michael Behrens was able to link the two cases together along with several other Ohio unsolved murders. 8 women were found murdered along a major interstate. Each of the ID'd victims were suspected to be prostitutes, and each of those women were believed to work at truck stops. Behrens later went undercover to better learn information about these murders, as the majority of the Johns were Teamsters who used CB radios to communicate alongside the highway. Behrens learned that the prostitutes would use CB radios in order to contact their next customers. He believed that the killer would probably pretend to be a John to summon the prostitute, then murdered the woman and later discarded the body. In early 1987, 27 Anne Marie Peterson became the 6th victim of the killer. She was last seen getting into a black and blue Peterbilt truck and was never seen alive again. Her body was located 25 days later. Surprisingly, it seemed that the killer may have kept Anne's body in his refrigerated truck for a while. Behrens soon determined that the first victim of the killer was a woman who was found in 1981 and has never been ID'd. Then, during the next 9 years, seven more women's bodies would be found, all suspected to be victims of the same killer. Behrens believed that due to the location of the bodies, the killer may have been a former police officer or security guard. 2 of the victims were last seen getting into a dark blue or black Peterbilt truck with a refrigerated trailer. His possible CB handles are Dr. No, Stargazer, and Dragon. He has never been ID'd, and the homicides remain unsolved. Sandra Valladay. 18-year-old Sandra Valladay worked as a secretary and coil winder for a factory in Manchester, New Hampshire. On February 1st, 1960, she left work and first went to the local library. Then, she took a swimming class at the YMCA. After that, she went to see a movie. Once the movie was over, she got on a bus to head home to the house where she lived with her parents. At 9:14 p.m., she got off the bus and began a mile walk to her home. She never made it. The next day, her bag, coat, wallet, and one of her boots were found in a canal. 9 days later, her body was found in a snowbank. She had been sexually assaulted, beaten, slashed, and then shot 4 times with a .22 caliber gun. Authorities had few leads in the case and it soon grew cold. The Boy in the Box. In the Ivy Hill Cemetery in Cedar Brook, Philadelphia, there sits a large plot, kept mostly entirely covered in stuffed animals, donated by families and visitors. The headstone reads, "America's Unknown Child," a permanent reminder of the child who lies beneath it. He was found dead and alone in a box, and no one could identify him. In February 1957, a young muskrat hunter set out to check his traps, set near a park just north of Philadelphia. As he moved through the brush, he found a small cardboard box, lying discarded on the ground. Inside was a naked body of a boy, wrapped in a plaid blanket. Fearing that the police would confiscate his traps if he alerted them to the box, the young hunter ignored it and resumed hunting. Several days later, a college student driving down the road noticed a bunny running alongside the highway. The student knew there were traps in the area and stopped to make sure the animal was safe. As he sifted through the underbrush searching for traps, he came across the box. Though he too feared interaction with the police, the student reported the body to them. Given that the boy was young, between 3 and 7 years old, police were hopeful that he would be identified quickly. However, once they saw the body, their hopes were dashed. While people would surely be looking for a missing boy who was healthy, well cared for, and clearly loved, it was unlikely that they would be looking for a scrawny, dirty, malnourished one. Unfortunately, the boy in the box was just that. His hair was matted and seemed to have recently cut, as clumps of it still clung to his body. His body was severely malnourished and covered with surgical scars, most notably on his ankle, groin, and chin. Despite the fact that he looked abandoned, police fingerprinted him, hoping to find a match. Sadly, no one did. Though the case has run cold, the publicity and the interest in this case by amateur investigators have turned up a couple notable theories throughout the years. But unfortunately, this mystery still remains unsolved. Unfortunately, every time I searched up New Orleans serial killer, it would just simply point to the Axeman of New Orleans. So unfortunately, I was not able to find information on this one. The journey has been long, and the journey has been, in some cases, very terrifying. But the worst is yet to come, as we finally dive into the final section of the Unsolved Murders and Mysteries Iceberg. Hello everyone, welcome back to the finale of the Juby Scott Halloween special. I am your host, Juby Scott, and today we look at one more section that I want to dedicate as a very special video, as some of these are literally the worst of the worst. So, this video will be a little shorter as it's one section, but go ahead and grab a seat and let me know in the comments below which one scared you the most. Let's begin. Little Miss Panasovsky. On February 19th, 1971, two teenagers hitchhiking along Interstate 75 discovered the partially submerged body of a young woman floating beneath the Lake Panasovsky Bridge in Florida. It is believed that she had been tossed from the bridge. She was in her late teens or early 20s, carried no identification, and had been dead for several weeks. She had been strangled with a man's belt that was still wrapped around her throat. Police were unable to identify her or her killer. She was laid to rest 6 months later. 10 years later, the case was reopened by Sheriff Jamie Adams and the woman's body was exhumed. Sheriff Adams had forensic anthropologist Dr. Williams Maples examine her. He discovered that she had orthopedic surgery to her right ankle, which was done by drilling holes in the leg bone and then winding the tendon through them. This was called the Watson-Jones or modified Watson-Jones technique. He believes that the physician who performed the surgery would remember doing that. Sheriff Adams next contacted forensic artist Linda Gallinier, who was an expert in making composite sketches based on human remains. She used x-rays and photographs of the woman's skull in order to make new composite sketches of her. She also created age regression sketches to show how she may have looked at younger ages. The technique had never been used by law enforcement before then. Flyers were sent by Sheriff Adams throughout the country with new sketches, but her identity remains a mystery. The woman was estimated to be 5'2", about 100 pounds, and approximately 20 years old. She had a large amount of surgery done to her legs as well as extensive dental work. This included crowns, caps, and fillings. She has also given birth to at least one child. Police suspect she may have been well cared for, left a family behind, and might have been a runaway. Police believe that after the woman is identified, her killer will be identified as well. The killer might have worn a man-sized 36 belt, which was found around her throat. Several tips came in as a result of the broadcast. However, none led to the victim's identification of her killer. In 2012, a new analysis of the woman's isotopes indicated that she had been from southeastern Europe, most likely Greece. It also revealed that she lived in Europe until about 1 year prior to her murder. The amount of lead in her teeth has also indicated that she may have been from the mining town of Lavio, Greece. In fall 2012, the case was featured on the Greek Missing Persons show. A viewer called in and stated that she believed the victim was a friend of hers named Constantina, who had a brother serving in the Navy near Lavrio. She said that they both went to school in Kafishka, a suburb of Athens, and were taught home economics. The caller, Constantina, and several other girls were part of a program for the school that sent them to either with United States or Australia with a 2-year contract for work. The caller said that she had lost contact with Constantina in 1970 when they were both sent in separate countries. The caller to Australia and Constantina to the United States. As of yet, no new leads have surfaced on her whereabouts, and her relatives have not been located. The victim and her killer remain unidentified. April 1990, Jane Doe. At around 8 a.m. on April 19, 1990, the partially nude body of a woman who was found behind the Pilot Oil Station, a truck stop next to Interstate 70 in Licking County, Ohio. She had been beaten to death, all of her jewelry and some articles of clothing were missing. Despite an extensive investigation by county sheriffs, the victim was never identified. Examination indicated she had been possibly a prostitute. The woman has been described as being between 25 and 40 years of age. She was 5'2" and weighed 110 pounds. She had a small white mole on the right side of her bridge of her nose, and a small brown mole on her right cheek. She had brown eyes and reddish hair. She had given birth to at least one child. The prime suspect in the woman's murder is an unidentified serial killer known as the Ohio Prostitute Killer. He was possibly a trucker who went by Dr. No over a CB radio. He may have preyed on prostitutes in Ohio between the years of 1981 and 1990. Male DNA was found on the woman's underwear that is believed to have belonged to her killer. In August 2017, the victim was identified as 29-year-old veteran Patrice Anita Corley. She had vanished on December 4, 1989 from Louisville, Kentucky, and left behind a young son. Her sister-in-law attempted to report her missing at the time, but was told that she was not allowed to do so because she was not a blood relative. She tried again in October 2016. This time, the report was accepted, and Patrice was identified through DNA testing as a result. In August 2021, a headstone with her name was placed at her grave. As a result of Patrice's identification, her murder case was reopened. In February 2019, Samuel Legg was arrested and charged with the murder of Sharon Lynn Kardishke, a suspected victim of the Ohio prostitute killer. However, a Licking County prosecutor stated that he is not certain if Legg is responsible for Patricia's murder. Her killer has yet to be identified. Warner Jane Doe. On the afternoon of November 12, 1991, a hunter was near Jake's Lake off Interstate 40 near Warner, Oklahoma, when he noticed a woman and a man on the other side of the lake. He heard the woman scream and then saw a man raise his hand and strike something. After the couple left the area, the hunter went over and found a trash bag. Inside the bag, he was horrified to discover the body of a newborn baby. The hunter then realized that he had witnessed the woman giving birth and the man beating the infant to death. Next to the bag was a towel and a brick, presumably the murder weapon. After getting over the initial shock, he called authorities. Police began searching for the identity of the baby girl in hopes of catching her killer. In the meantime, the community came together and held a memorial service for the child. The man and woman were both Caucasian and fled in an unidentified car. At the time, the woman was around 20 years old, had medium-length brown hair, was 5'5", with a slender build. The man was also around 20 years old, was 5'9" and 6 feet, with a slender build, black shoulder-length hair, and a mustache. Since the baby was mixed race, the man is not believed to be the child's father. The couple fled in the area in a mid-1970s white-on-red Chevrolet. In 2009, DNA evidence of the crime scene was placed in the CODIS. It was matched to a 37-year-old Virginia woman named Penny Anita Lowry, who was determined to be the baby's mother. She was placed in the database after she was convicted of wire fraud. At the time of the murder, she was a 19-year-old college student at Connors State College and went by the name Penny Varnell. She had been interviewed shortly afterwards. Another student told police that she had looked pregnant, but had gone away and came back telling everyone that she had surgery to lose weight. When questioned, however, she denied being pregnant. After the DNA results came back in July 2009, Lowry was arrested. She then confessed to killing her child. In October 2010, she pleaded guilty to being an accessory to the murder. She was sentenced to 45 years in prison for reasons unknown. She had refused to name the man who helped commit the murder. DNA testing also identified the child's father as an African-American man living in California. However, he is not considered a suspect because the male attacker was described as Caucasian. To this day, the official baby's killer has not been found. Tristan Brubach. Tristan Brubach was a 13-year-old German boy who was murdered in the Frankfurt suburbs of Hosk. His murder remains unsolved. Brubach was last seen alive at Bruno Ask Anlage. Forgive me, there's a lot of German in this. A park in front of the Frankfurt Hosch railway station. At 3:20 p.m. on the day of his murder, his body was discovered by children walking home from school. They returned to the school to tell their teachers, and the police were informed at 5:08 p.m. Brubach's body was in a pedestrian tunnel that runs alongside an underground section of the Liedenbach River. The tunnel is known locally as the Liederbach Tunnel. Brubach had been beaten unconscious and strangled. Though the cause of death was a long slash across his neck, both testicles, as well as his flesh from his buttocks and thighs, had been removed. The murder weapon lay on the concrete block nearby. The murder had been seen from a distance by 3 teenagers, not the same people as the children who discovered Brubach's body. However, they did not realize at the time what they were witnessing. These witnesses give the police a description of a suspect, and a composite sketch was produced. In March 1999, a year after the murder, Tristan's rucksack was found in the forest in Niedernhausen, 15 miles from the crime scene. The rucksack contained a Czech language road atlas of Germany, which is believed not to have belonged to Brubach, who did not speak Czech and had no reason or means to possess such an item. The police consequently expanded their inquiries to the Czech Republic and Slovakia, but no viable leads emerged. Frankfurt prosecutor's office is offering 15,000 euros for any information leading to the conviction of Brubach's murderer. To this day, he has not been found. The Cold Skeleton. In 1976, a male skeleton was found in the home of a photographer named Emery Kolb. Several people had speculated that it belonged to Glenn Hyde, a man who knew Kolb and who vanished with his wife Bessie decades earlier. We actually talked about this one in an earlier episode of the Iceberg. So, there's a little fun fact for you. The Hydes were a newlywed couple who had vanished while taking a trip down the Colorado River at the Grand Canyon in 1928. He was an experienced river rafter who wanted to set up a new speed record for traveling through the canyon, which would have put her in the book as the first documented woman to do so. They were last seen on November 18th. They were photographed by Kolb at his studio and near the rim. Adolph G. Sutro was one of the last people to see them. When they failed to reappear by December, a full search was made for them. Their boat, with their supplies fully strapped in, was found in River Mile 237. There is evidence they made it as far as River Mile 225, where they may have made camp. Their bodies were never found, but it is possible that they were lost around River Mile 232. In 1971, a woman claiming to be Bessie appeared to some vacationers on a commercial rafting trip and reported that she had killed Glenn down in the river and disposed of his remains. But she later recanted this tale. When the skeleton was found on Cold's property, it was believed to be Glenn's, until analysis of it showed the person was too young to have been him. When famous river-running Georgie White Clark passed away in 1992, many believed she was actually Bessie, especially since items of theirs was found in her possessions. They didn't even resemble each other, and it's more likely that the items were souvenirs. So far, no one is exactly sure what happened to the Hydes, nor do they know the identity of the mystery skeleton, which has been nicknamed the Cold Skeleton. In 2008, investigators determined that the skeleton belonged to an unidentified man that had committed suicide on Shoshone Point in the Grand Canyon in 1933. After finding a photo of him, however, he had never been positively identified and the hides remain missing. No one knows whose skeleton remains these are. Lucy. On the afternoon of September 8th, 1992, a motorist came across a young woman dancing in the meridian of a busy street in Port Humani, California. When he stopped to help her, he began asking her questions. However, she could not understand him. He realized that she was mute and hearing was impaired. Fearing for her safety, he took her to the Ventura County Police Station. The police tried to question her, but she was unable to communicate with them. The only clue to her identity was a receipt for a bank in San Diego, 200 miles to the south. The police had no reason to detain the young woman, so she was released. The next day, a police officer came upon her, wandering along a busy street again. She appeared to be terribly confused. This time, she was placed in the homeless shelter for women. At first, she was unable to formally communicate with anyone. The only thing she could do was pantomime, mimic, and use home sign language. Communications specialist Chris Barrows was brought in to help communicate with her. Chris first tried to determine the woman's name. He and Marty Rubel, the shelter supervisor, wrote their names down and gestured to themselves. They then asked her to either write down or communicate her name to them. She apparently understood and began to make hand symbols in the form of letters. Chris wrote down the letters which spelled the name Luxi. When she saw this, she had an instant positive reaction and recognition, which led Chris to believe that that was her name. Luxi is believed to be a derivative of the Spanish first name. For convenience sake, they dubbed her Lucy. The next thing they tried to do was determine Lucy's age. They were able to determine hand gestures that she was 23. Despite the ease of which they determined her name and age, finding someone who knew her would present a far greater challenge. In the days and weeks after she surfaced in Port Humani, the FBI and the various missing persons organizations ran checks on her. However, all turned up empty. The only solid lead was the receipt found in her pocket. However, that also led nowhere. Authorities now find themselves at a dead end. Over the following few months, Lucy slowly began to reveal fragmentary glimpses into her past. She claimed that she had flown on a plane to California, had a child, and had it taken from her. She was then left alone. She appeared to be well cared for, although she does not have cooking skills. She understands to come and eat when it is time to do so. She also has normal grooming habits, such as the ability to brush her hair and clean herself. Chris does not believe she was on the streets for long before she was found. Lucy has brown hair and brown eyes. She appears to be in her early 20s in 1993. Her ethnic background is uncertain, although she may have been born in Mexico. The police and the employees of the shelter hope that someone will be able to identify her and that she will be returned to her family. Unfortunately, in 1993, Lucy left the shelter and vanished. In December, she was found in Cotati. She had a small amount of methamphetamine with her at a time. Doctors later determined that she could actually hear but had a mental age of a 9-year-old. Soon after, she vanished again. According to some sources, as of May 1st, 2014, Lucy was homeless and living in Santa Paula, California. She communicated with grunts and hand gestures and could often be seen walking around the town with a stroller full of junk. She had also been witnessed by local Santa Paulans speaking clear English and asking for small sums of money. These sightings, however, have not been confirmed. Bear Brook remains. On November 10, 1985, a hunter came across a tipped-over 55-gallon drum in trash near Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. Inside the drum, he found the remains of an adult woman 23 to 33 years old and a little girl 5 to 11 years old, wrapped in plastic. The New Hampshire State Police immediately checked missing people cases from the 1970s and 1980s, but were unable to identify the bodies. In 1986, the New Hampshire State Police believed that the case would finally be solved when they suspected 2 missing people named Grace Reap and her 5-year-old daughter Gracie as the unidentified bodies found a year earlier. But dental records proved the identified remains found in the 55-gallon drum were not those of Grace or her daughter Gracie. Over the years, New Hampshire State Police received hundreds of leads and distributed composite drawings of the victims throughout the Northeast and Quebec, Canada. Several people in the town of Allenstown said the unidentified woman resembled someone who had left town with several children a few years earlier, but this proved to be a dead end once again when the woman was found alive in Arizona with the children. New Hampshire State Police received yet another lead about a mother and a daughter who had vanished from a Maine Indian reservation. The descriptions and the time of their disappearance seemed like a perfect match, but the mother and daughter who were quickly located alive in another town in Maine. Without any solid leads, investigators started to check several of the elementary schools in the state of New Hampshire and almost every medical record of missing persons from Cape Cod, New Hampshire, to California. Their efforts proved futile in the end. In 2000, the case took another turn when it was assigned to a New Hampshire state trooper. The officer returned to the area where the bodies were discovered in the 55-gallon drum and stumbled upon yet another 55-gallon drum. 2 bodies were found in the drum. Both of them were young female children. DNA determined that the remains of the 2 little girls found in 2000 were linked to the adult woman found in 1985. The remains found in 2000 were that of a white female child, 1 to 3 years old, and another white female child, 2 to 4 years old. The New Hampshire Cold Case Unit is still trying to identify the remains found in 1985 and 2000. There are no current suspects in this case, and the identification of all female victims is still unknown. And our last case, the Iceberg incident. The Kecksburg incident occurred on December 9, 1965, at Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, United States, when a fireball was reported by citizens of 6 U.S. states and Canada over Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario. Astronomers said that it was likely to have been a meteor burning up in the atmosphere and descending at a steep angle. NASA released a statement in 2005 reporting that the experts had examined fragments from the area and determined they were not from a Soviet satellite. The records of their findings were lost in 1987. NASA responded to court orders and Freedom of Information Act requests to search for the records. The incident gained wide notoriety in popular culture and UFOlogy, with speculation ranging from extraterrestrial craft to debris from a Soviet space probe Cosmos 96, and is often called the Pennsylvania Roswell. Some people in the village of Kecksburg, about 30 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, reported wisps of blue smoke, vibrations, and a thump, and also that something from the sky had crashed in the woods. The area where the object landed was immediately sealed off on the order of the U.S. Army and state police officers. In anticipation of a close inspection or whatever may have fallen, state police officials there ordered the area roped off to await the expected arrival of U.S. engineers and possibly civilian scientists. When state troopers and the Air Force personnel searched the woods, they found absolutely nothing. Authorities discounted proposed explanations such as a plane crash, errant missile test, or a re-entering satellite debris, and generally assumed it to be a meteor. Astronomer Paul Lanier said the fireball was most likely from a meteor entering the Earth's atmosphere. Geophysicist George Wetherill discounted speculations that it was debris from a satellite and agreed that the reports were probably due to a meteor. While the officials were saying that it was basically just a meteor, there was a lot of speculation, and the civilians believe that they are still hiding something. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, and with that, we have finally completed the Unsolved Mysteries and Murders Iceberg Explained. This was a lot of fun, this was very interesting, and not gonna lie, some of these cases actually did spook me out. I enjoy learning about these cases, but I will say this, doing them all at such a volume, it definitely started making me a little paranoid, so I know a lot of people were enjoying this series. I'm just letting you know right now, it's probably going to be a bit before I do something like this again, just because it really was kind of freaking me out. But with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you so much for the feedback that I've gotten for doing this series. And thank you for everyone who has liked, shared the videos, and of course, subscribed. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great Halloween, everyone.